So today's video is about shadow work. Now, this is likely the single most important part of anyone's healing process. There is no healing unless we go into our shadow self, essentially the repressed self, right? Now, what is our shadow self? The shadow self can be equated to the unconscious self. Essentially, the conscious mind and the unconscious mind is split when we see aspects of ourselves that are not in alignment with our story or narrative about who we are. We send them to the unconscious mind because we don't want to encounter or accept that this is a part of our being and a part of who we are or our personality. All right? Now, why do we create this unconscious self? Well, a lot of it has to do with our need to create an ego. Our ego is the narrative or story around our personal self or our personal identity. Now, when we encounter any aspects or any qualities of ourselves that run contrary or run against this narrative, we can't accept it. And we have to push it down to a place where we will never encounter it, right? And so, I want to make it clear, the shadow self is not always negative or bad, right? It's just things that don't align with our story about ourselves. You could have a narrative that you're your family's perfect son, that you're so successful, right? But deep down, you want to be a musician instead of being a banker. But that doesn't align with your story or narrative about you being the successful, wealthy son. So you will suppress that your want to be a musician down into the shadow self, right? And our shadow self is also any feelings, emotions that we feel like we can't process or integrate. It's anything that we can't accept, any experiences that we don't feel like we can integrate into our being, okay? So that is the unconscious. That is the parts of ourselves that we haven't necessarily shone a light onto. So what happens when we repress our shadow? Well, the more and more that you push your shadow down, the more and more you don't want to look at these aspects of yourself, right? The more that we can encounter physical and mental illness, okay? You will have to detach from what's going on internally, all right? A lot of people with personality disorders, a lot of people with narcissistic personality disorder are people with a deeply embedded shadow and they refuse to look at it. Denial of the shadow will actually make the shadow parts appear more. So the more that you suppress it, right? The more that you suppress your want and need to be a musician, the more you'll just find your way into live music bars. No, but in all honesty, the more that these parts will begin to rear their head, okay? The more that you suppress aspects of yourself, the more they will begin to make themselves shown in your life, okay? If you repress your anger more and more, the more easily you will be triggered into aggressive and rage-like states. So there's also like a spiritual, energetic component of when we repress our shadow. The more that we push it down, the more the universe will align us with events that have to make us look at it, okay? So the more that you want to push down the fact that, you know, maybe someone passing away doesn't affect you, the more you will encounter moments or events in your life that will make you have to go through that grief process, okay? The more that we just want to push it aside or not integrate these experiences, the more our life becomes this experience in itself. We will not be our authentic selves if we repress our shadow. Our shadow self is us. We can create this fictional mask, but that's not really who we are. When we confront someone who does not know their shadow or is pushing it aside more and more, that is someone that oftentimes comes across as inauthentic or has toxic positivity, right? Or who shames or guilts us for our behaviors or for our missteps. There's nothing more annoying than someone who deeply represses their shadow. Also, when we repress our shadow self, we project it onto other people. When we can't encounter or endure qualities about ourselves, we have to put it onto others. So if you see someone that is constantly projecting onto you, right? It's constantly saying, oh, you're this or you're that or you're liar. It's their own qualities that they're repressing deep down in and of itself. But it needs to come out. It can't stay in them. So they have to go and they have to externalize it onto other people. Sorry. So, how do we heal our shadow? the first step is to become the observer and witness to our thoughts, okay? You want to set an intention that any thoughts you would normally repress about yourself, you're going to allow in and you're going to take notice and pay attention to them, right? So maybe a thought comes up that like, oh my God, if I don't do everything my partner needs, they will leave me. And instead of just quickly repressing that, you allow it in. The next step is you want to practice non-judgment. You also don't want to attach a label to it. You don't want to identify with the thought. You don't want to say it's bad or good or I'm this or that. You just want to accept it as it is. Like, okay, there's this thought there that if I don't do what my partner wants of me, they will leave me. The next aspect is we have to allow in the emotional experience that is attributed to that thought process. So then you start to see, okay, what my partner leaves me, what does that bring up inside me if I don't do everything they need? Terror, fear, anxiety. Oh my God, this hasn't even happened, but yet these are the emotions I'm repressing. Oh wow, okay? So now you're aware of the emotional state. You're bringing your conscious awareness to it. You're feeling it internally. Now you want to trace the origin of the emotional experience. Where does this heightened, triggered state come from, okay? And so meditate on it. Sit back. Receive the answers from your own internal guidance system. It could be, in this instance, that maybe your father left when you were younger and you always thought it was your fault. And you actually never processed that or allowed it to come up, right? So now there's this heightened feeling, right, of the repressed self of if I don't do what other people want, they'll leave me. The abandonment is coming up. This is your repressed shadow self. So now that we're aware of the shadow, what do we do with it? We have to practice self-compassion and acceptance, okay? You're not bad for maybe feeling like, oh my God, my partner would leave me, even though there's been no basis or no evidence of that, right? It's just, it's an aspect of your past self, of your inner child that is coming up that you buried deep down because you didn't want to look at the pain, because there's shame or guilt in that, right? You have to have compassion for that inner child self who was left. You have to have compassion for your present self who still has these thoughts, right? And you have to accept that it's okay, that it makes sense. There's nothing wrong with you for having this. We heal our shadow by accepting our shadow, by looking at our shadow, and by loving it, by loving our flaws, all right? And so our last step is that we integrate. We take this part that we bury deep down and we bring it into ourselves. We don't suppress it. This aspect of our consciousness that carries all these fears, all these experiences, we no longer shove it down into an area where we never have to look at it. We embrace the feelings that come up and we don't judge them anymore. This is an ongoing process. Shadow work never stops. But as you encounter your shadow, you become your authentic self. And you're no longer portraying a fictional character. And others will look to you for advice and for guidance. All right, thank you for watching this video. Please make sure to subscribe. Leave any comments below. Thanks, guys.